Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Radiantly Awakened podcast. Today we have Laura Escudero, and Laura is a movement alchemist, a somatic psychotherapist, counselor, yoga teacher, embodied flow facilitator, and body worker. And she believes creative expression and movement are the most potent medicine. She has more than a decade of experience with body-based therapies, and she's dedicated to love, self-empowerment, inspiration, service, and connection. And she's also my somatic psychotherapist. So for those of you who have been tuning in to previous episodes, I've been announcing this over numerous episodes, this one that you're listening to right now. So it's about time, and I'm so excited to have you here because this woman has helped me in profound ways, like ridiculously. So we'll go into all of that. But yeah, Laura, would you like to introduce yourself further?
Much for having me here. It's such an honor to be in this space, also to be in your container as well. It's really beautiful to see, your journey and your radiance, being offered into the world. Because that's a big part of my work, seeing other people, be able to find whatever brings them back home and come forward into the world with joy and aliveness.
I love it. I love your for those of you listening, like actually listening, not watching on YouTube, doing like this arm movement, upward arm movement, like I love it. So tell us more about you, where it all began, whatever you want to tell us today.
Where it all began. So originally I'm from Argentina. I grew up moving around the world a lot. I had the opportunity and privilege to grow up in a lifestyle that meant every 3 years we moved to a new country. And this exposed me to a lot of different communities, cultures, belief systems. I then went and studied anthropology and did a master's in cultural heritage and preserving basically the things that gives us meaning in life. Like I was always very called or seduced. There was something about the mystery of the meaning behind things, not just the things itself. It was almost like there was this aliveness that I saw through everything in this beingness that drew me in. And it wasn't until what was I doing? I was in a corporate job. I was working multiple roles. Yeah, I was being paid not that well for the amount of work I was putting, and I was also teaching dance. And I had an ovarian cyst, and it just went crazy.
You had another what? What was the?
I had an ovarian cyst, so I started experiencing. Basically, it started with me knowing something was not quite right in my body. And I remembered I kept going to these different doctors, and I was living in the UK at the time. And they were like, nah, everything's fine. Just go on the contraceptive pill or try this ibuprofen. And it was just like they kept doing this thing. And I'm like, it's not helping. Something is wrong. I knew it. I could feel it in my body. And I just couldn't get through until I went to Malaysia and they confirmed it. You're like, oh yeah, your cyst is around 7 centimeters by now. And I was like, whoa, that's a really large cyst. By the time I had surgery, it was 12 centimeters, which is almost the size of a big grapefruit in my womb. And through that process, I was already quite in love with yoga. I was doing dance therapy. I kind of went deep into that space. I went to a deep somatic exploration through plant medicine, yoga, movement therapy. And then I realized like, whoa, I've been studying all these cultures and rituals, connections, cosmologies, because really that's what I want to be doing. I want to be deepening that relationship with myself and my body. Mm-hmm. So in some way, the cyst, even though was like a big ego death, because I had to face my mortality at such a young age, it also opened my world and my connection to myself. So my dance therapist really supported me to keep exploring that, not only as a personal therapy process, but also as, what could I be offering? What am I learning through this process? I became a yoga teacher. And slowly I started reclaiming these parts of my being that I realized was so connected with my disease in the start, like in the root of it all. I was like, oh, wow, my cyst had so much to do with the suppression or oppression of my creativity, of my relationship with my feminine, with my body, with my ancestors, trauma. And the story just goes on from there. I just really realized, wow, if I really want to repattern this, not only for my grandmothers and all the women that were here before me, I really need to show up to the work for myself and what that meant in my own experience and in my own body.
Wow.
So yeah, I kind of went into a deep journey of studying with all the yogis that really brought this awareness of somatics. Because when I first started yoga, I saw a lot of, I really loved yoga that was beautiful, and I was like very challenged by it because I had been doing dance for so many years. But when I realized, I guess the journey of, relating to the body, you start to go more into the subtlety. And I realized form over function is way more important. Function over form, is more important than just a shape. And then discovering what the shape could offer me, my whole world just expanded. And yeah, that led me to eventually studying psychotherapy, even though somatics and movement therapy and yoga was like really what kind of brought me into healing. The psychotherapy just kind of integrated into a way that was a little bit more accessible for the general audience, that I was seeing really needed this kind of medicine. So anyways, yeah, a little bit of a long response to your question, but
No, I love that. And there's so much I didn't know, really. There's so much. Okay, this is like a completely, like you've just explained so much beautiful stuff about your journey, but I just have little curiosities. I want to know what your corporate job was. Just quick answer. I just want to know for some reason.
well, I wouldn't even say it was a massively corporate job. I was working for a couple social enterprises. So it was much more nonprofit based in terms of I was working for NGOs. I even worked for the UN at one point.
Wow.
So very kind of traditional cultural anthropologist kind of in the world, development world jobs, which also I didn't really love because it created this separateness of like top-down organizations versus grassroots based. And I was like, it's really hard.
All right, beautiful. And so back into like the body. So there's some people, I feel like most people who have listened to this podcast before get some of it. But some people might just be tuning in for the very, very first time. And this might be the first time that they've ever been exposed to this type of work. They might, we know that society has a very focused approach on the mind and mental, and that's just how like people operate, and there's not a lot of focus on embodiment and somatics, and people might hear these terms and think they know what it's all about but actually have no idea. So I'd love to hear from you. What does embodiment and somatics mean to you?
So this is an interesting question. I get it asked a lot, especially when I tell people I'm a somatic psychotherapist. They're like, what does that actually mean? And I guess the main thing that puts everything into context is that we live in a Western society, or most of us do, that has this Cartesian split where the body and the mind are separate. And for me, and what not only my personal experience, but everything that I've learned and I studied is, consciousness doesn't just reside in the brain and in the head, it resides in our entire body. So, when there's this idea, like, oh, I'm so much in my head. Of course, yeah, but that can be moved through your whole body. Once you start to develop that relationship, or even just simply awareness that you feel things through your skin. Of course, that seems obvious, but it's a massive way of being in through the world and knowing how you move through the world. Like, oh, it's cold. Like, I'm getting information from that, but also like those kind of sensory inputs go into deeper knowings, felt sense. Just like your intuition can tell you, oh, this person's not a very like good energy. You know, there's a lot more to just body intelligence than unfortunately our culture really gives it credit for. And so somatics for me is, the word soma comes from this idea of like aliveness in the body, or like the nectar of the body. And even in Vedic culture, Vedic, I would say more philosophy, there's this story that the gods, you know, they would churn the nectar or the milk to bring the nectar. And it's this idea that, you know, when we kind of go deeper into the felt sense of our beingness, then there's so much there for us to know. I was listening to this podcast the other day, and I was talking about the body being a metaverse, you know, or this like cliche idea that the body is a universe, and there's so much there to know. Yeah, it seems like a very abstract idea when we're new to it, but when you've been doing yoga for a while, or you've been a dancer, or whatever it is that brought you into your body, those things start to become just second nature. You know, it's kind of like Iyengar has this quote that says, you know, through the self, we know the self to be more of the self, or something around those words. And it's like the body is this incredible vehicle for not only our awakening, but it is our home. It is our memories. It is our aliveness. It is our joy. It's our pleasure. So, you know, when we're working simply kind of on a split kind of Cartesian idea that we're just working with the mind here, we actually lack this integration of the wisdom that our cells hold memories or trauma. So actually we could talk all we want about our problems, but it might not repattern it cellularly, nervous system based wise. It is way more beyond the conceptual, you know, mind. And the nervous system knows that. That's why we have different parts of the brain that, you know, and I'm doing this gesture because it's for those who are listening and not watching me. You know, there's this model of the nervous system and the brain where, you know, if we have our arm up, this the forearm would be our spine and our nervous system that releases through the body, and this fist that we have on top is the brain. And the bottom part of our brain is more concerned with our what we call our reptilian brain, which is responsible for eating, pooing, knowing when you're hungry, having to go to the toilet, very basic needs. But we have an entire part of the brain that connects to the rest of the body that is around emotions.
Sorry, I just need to laugh for a second. I'm like laughing at myself because when you said pooing, there's like a part of me that's like, she said pooing. Sorry, continue. I'm just being a child over here. Sorry. Sorry, everybody listening. I just can't help myself sometimes. Sorry. So reptilian brain responsible for pooing, eating, survival things. Yes.
Basic body needs. Mm-hmm. But basically they're pretty automatic. Like, you know, you don't think about them. You're just like, I need to do this. Mm-hmm. Limbic brain, which is related with more of like intelligence, emotional intelligence, is more associated with horses because they have a really strong heart coherence or heart emotional intelligence. And then finally, we have our neocortex that wraps around it all. And it's our ability to conceptualize, to contemplate, to make logic of a situation. And unfortunately, when we experience trauma, it hijacks that system. And so we go back to really autonomic nervous system kind of adaptations for survival, whether it's fight or freeze. So there's this whole other aspect of ourself that we need to address, that we can't bypass, unfortunately, if we actually want to go through it, through the pain, through the suffering, the blocks, whatever it is that we're working with. So I guess when we work somatically, we're working with the intelligence of the whole being, which includes the body with wholeness. So it's not a split, not even between body and mind, but also including soul and the spirit.
Yeah. I love that explanation. And it just brings me back to like, even with myself, but I know so many people who have gone through talk therapy, and, you know, it serves a place. I'm not going to say it doesn't, and definitely served a place for myself, but they can't figure out why it is that they're still in the same patterns. They're still doing the same things. They're still reacting. Like nothing has really changed because they've just been in that domain of the mind. So it really makes sense that when you say that, it's like, yeah, like our cells store memories, and, you know, like when trauma happens, it's like this part of the brain is hijacked, and it's, yeah, you have to go through it. And like one thing I wanted to mention as well is my very first, not my very first, because I studied yoga, but my very first like one-on-one experience of understanding like the nervous system and like what dysregulation is versus a regulated nervous system state. So like the diagram of the window of tolerance, the very first time that was shown to me, and for those of you who are listening who have no idea what I'm talking about, very simply, your nervous system could be regulated or dysregulated, and there is this diagram called the window of tolerance showing kind of when you like what to look out for when you get into a dysregulated state. Is that how you? We'll just go with that. It's very simple, very simple. But the first time I was shown that was by a therapist who specialized in trauma, but most of it was talk therapy. Like most of it was talk therapy. And then she also had EMDR as well. And actually, I'd want to know what you think about that in a second. But I feel like a lot of the talking that we did, it was just bringing stuff up to the surface. And then it was probably actually just re-traumatizing me, and like nothing felt clear. It just felt like my brain, like the way that it was, like my brain started to create stories about it and started going to worst case scenario, and there was nothing there to like really ground me. It was just like bringing all this stuff up, and then like, what if this happened? What if that happened? Like, you know, like there was so much around that, like around repressed memories. It was really triggering. And like the whole time, it's like funny that we were talking about trauma in these therapy sessions, but like I was clearly in a dysregulated state in those sessions, and there was nothing to really even try and bring me down. We just kept talking, which if anything made it worse. Do you know what I mean? So I know that now. Back then I didn't know that. Back then I was just putting my trust in this person because they said that they were an expert in trauma. But it just felt like now that I know different and know more about the body, it's like it just makes me think about how many people are getting into these situations where they think that maybe they are getting help to an extent, but it's like, is it really clearing, like not clearing, that's the wrong word, but really helping to resolve things, or is it just making it worse, you know? So I'm just going to stop talking there. I want to know what you think about EMDR as well. Yeah, so yeah, I'm just going to stop talking.
So just to comment on what you were just talking about, I definitely have worked with amazing more cognitive-based therapists or, you know, psychologists who do bring in somatics and whatnot. And when they come together, it's like very profound work. But when it's just one or the other, I think it's very limiting. And the main reason for that is, you know, as we were talking before, we can't just choose mind over matter. It just doesn't work like that. It's not how we are. We're feeling, sensing creatures. You know, the body keeps a score. Is, you know, Bessel van der Kolk wrote that book as a clinician because he saw that trauma was, PTSD was literally locked in people's bodies, whether they, were having conversations around their experience of going to war or not. Most likely it made it worse. It kind of got them into more flashbacks. But this, basically somatics comes back to this idea of movement, or the felt sense actually being one of the first senses we develop. So movement, when we're in the womb of our mothers, the first way we begin to know and understand and even know that we are alive or have the experience of aliveness is through movement. We start to push and then eventually get touch because of that, experience of movement. And then we get more kinesthetic feedback. So movement and the feeling of the sense of touch, they're pre-verbal. They go before we even have the language to say, oh, this is how I feel. First, we have the feeling. We have the felt sense of whatever it is, whether it's sadness, emotion, So this is one of the reasons I'm super passionate about the way we use movement and somatics therapeutically. I think a lot of people have been also engaging with this because it's becoming more aware. There's more awareness around it now that there's more awareness around trauma. And there's this whole movement around it. It's like the awakening. It's like the new yoga. But yeah, there's something, there's not something, it is so potent, and it is our kind of most primal way of connecting back to those deep inner roots. And if we go really hardcore into them, which is kind of what you were alluding to, like looping and cathartic, kind of like just going into it and kind of not going out of it. We see this in movement a lot when, people are like going to an expression, they're just pillow bashing and yelling, and maybe they actually felt grief, but they were just trying to push the experience out of themselves instead of allowing the felt sense of whatever they're feeling, say it's sadness or anger, to move them. So the cathartic looping, and I'm kind of entering different more subtleties around what you were talking about, but we see this within the kind of just speaking within, staying in the mind, is that we speak around something or we move around something. We don't actually go through it and move how it needs to be released and expressed. And sometimes it doesn't need to be released. Sometimes it needs spaciousness. Sometimes something needs acknowledgement. Sometimes it just needs to be befriended and held in a new way that it's never been received in it before. So this is a reason why when we work with somatics and the intelligence of the body, we go slowly. We go with self-awareness. We go with a sense of creating capacity and resiliency, so that we're not just re-traumatizing ourselves, as you said, like just talking about things and then getting more dysregulated, or just having these extreme dances or violent expressions where we feel really alive because we're like doing the thing, but we then feel kind of worse because we didn't actually get where we needed to go, or where our being or body needed to go. It's quite a more, it requires a lot of presence and awareness and all the things that we probably have been conditioned away from. So it's a big reclamation to drop into the body, to like take the pause and breathe into the back of your back body, your lungs, and then feel your feet and punch your toes, like taking the deeper breath so you arrive into the space. It's not really something that we get taught, in high school or any of those things. We're not really provided with the emotional, physical, and internal resources that we need so that we can be healthy, resilient, flexible, adaptable beings. And so this work around somatics with the psychotherapy, with kind of the talk therapy and the kind of more dream work, or, you know, the archetype work, is so profound, because we can bring all the parts to be seen and met, and we're not excluding one over the other because that's what we've grown up to think it is. Yeah, this is like part of the reclamation and the healing. And that's why, going back to what you asked me about the EDM, MDR, those things are so powerful when we're all, you know, when we bring all these things, it's how we do it. It's not what, you know, and this is a very different way of approaching things. And one of my first somatic yoga teachers taught me this, and she was like, the West is so obsessed with knowing with the how and the what. The how, sorry, but the East just understands that if you're with the what in fullness, then you already know the how. And I was like, what? I don't really get that. What does that even mean? For such a while, until I realized, like, there's so many times that we need science to explain things for us so that we can get to the understanding and then trust the experience. And that's not to invalidate that, like, we need that. But so many times, if you know, instead of me spending half an hour explaining, like, why is the breath, coming back to the breath can be such a doorway to presence, and instead you just having the felt sense, embodied experience of that without me having to tell you, is so much more profound, because then you've not only integrated conceptually, but through your own experience.
Yeah, I love it. Oh, it's a breath of fresh air, really. Like it's actually it's a breath of fresh air listening to it. It's like I'm just calming down. Like I'm like, it's so nice to listen to. It's like, yes. Um, yeah. I was gonna say, like, I mean, we've spoken a bit about it, but let's dive in a little bit deeper into like more of like the gifts of this work. So like there's the gift of like acknowledging the trauma and moving through that, but like what else, you know? Like people, it's not really that sexy. It's like it's like, yeah, let's resolve our trauma, which I'm sure like a lot of people who have awareness of it, they're like, okay, yeah, I'd prefer not to have so much reactivity or dysregulation in my life. But what other gifts are there?
And there's two things I want to respond to that, and I'll respond directly to your question first, because so, you know, get to the point. And the first thing is, you know, in order to feel the spectrum of aliveness and fullness of being, you need to experience the whole self. So if you want more pleasure and joy in your life, you have to feel the parts that are not in pleasure and aliveness, the parts that maybe are in freeze or maybe are in numb. You know, those doorways not only allow you to resolve and then find more regulation and harmony and peace, but they actually allow you to feel more spectrum of yourself. And I like to think this almost like if we were playing music, right, and we had a piano, you know, it's great if we have access to just, you know, our favorite keys, and they're like, oh yeah, we got that song. But then now we have this other song, and there's a beauty to be able to feel sadness and grief and all of that. There's a potency of, that's the truth of human experience. But not only that, like, oh, now I've got two keys, but then I have all this spectrum in between. Now I have a whole range of keys that I can play so many more songs of, not just sad songs and happy songs, but I can go from, you know, sadness to more melancholic, to more feeling, to more joy. You know, it's like, it's feeling the aliveness of what it means to be a human, the complexity of being a human. And you know, that's maybe not where everyone's at, and it can be a privilege as well to even have access to that, in the sense of, you know, we don't all have time and space or access or inner external resources or systemized resources because of our race or our status or, money, etc. But if we do have those places or that ability, that privilege, I don't see why you wouldn't want to have the gift of the full spectrum of you. And that also brings me to the next point, is that when you do access more of you access more of life, you access more of nature itself, because it's like we start to be able to notice where we might have changed ourselves into our own, chains of oppression, or how we might have, locked ourselves into being smaller than who we thought we were, or thinking that we only could be a certain way because we had shame, or that we were not good enough to have more money. And, I say that with an awareness of like, we can't just think ourselves out of that, and we have to be really aware of our privilege and our ability to access, as I said before, inner resources, external resources. But this work does offer that. And the other thing I wanted to talk about is have a sip of water.
Oh.
I might keep it at that actually for now. I'm sure the other bit, because I'll go into a big tangent.
Okay.
we'll go. But basically, yeah, the gifts of feeling the fullness of self, of releasing our own chains, of accessing freedom, of accessing joy, pleasure, besides just harmony and peace and regulation. It's okay, I'm just gonna go into it because it's happening.
Do it. Do it.
Also a political act. It's also a social justice act. It's a way of decolonizing the way we've been conditioned to think that how we have to be, and that we are separate from nature, that we are separate from ourselves, that we are separate from our own creative expression and how we want to move in the world. But it's just a way as reclaiming rest, it's a social, it's a birthright, it's a social and social activist kind of right. And I'm losing my words here because I'm trying to get really pumped about it. But it's a way of decolonizing, our relationship to our bodies and ourselves, and to realize, there's so much more to how we can be in relationship to ourselves and therefore others. And it opens a whole new spectrum of beingness that maybe the West or colonization has actually, destroyed, and which is why so many people in the West are like, have this deep cry for ritual, for initiation, for culture, for eldership, and they seem almost separate, but they're really not. It's this idea that we are, as I said before, feeling, sensing creatures. We are not separate from nature. Nature has this intelligent way of being, in that it regulates and it knows how to, like, okay, if it's getting hot, there'll be more rain or there'll be hurricanes. And disease, there's this concept in Vedic, even in Ayurveda, that says disease is really the lack of just being in harmony with our own nature. And disease is kind of like, you can imagine it as these blocks that are in the way of our true self. And sometimes those blocks gives us great gifts and expansions and understanding of life. It's not to discredit that, but when we live in a society that's how things are, that's really toxic and unhealthy. So to claim this, which is not just a gift, it's our birthright. It's, I should be able to have a deep connection with my womb as much as my heart, as much as my brain. Why should I just prioritize my brain because it can give me money when there's so much more to life than that? Anyways, that was my little political rant that I was trying to get into.
Yeah, I love it. I do love that. I love it when you get on your political rants. I'm really happy you did that. So good. There was so much there. Yeah, there's so much there. And I feel like what I want to do is just go into a little story of my experience in I'm just going to start talking because I don't know why I need to give an intro to what I'm about to say. I'm just going to talk. This situation popped up for me, okay? And working with Laura has given me the opportunity to just start to repattern so much of these old programs from, you know, my upbringing that are embedded in my cells, right? Like these programs of whatever they are. So I'll give you an example, like control, just friction, tension, like just in relating in myself, in the way that I speak to myself, in how my body is, it's all interconnected, right? So if my body's really tense, my mind's tense, I'm going to act tense. And then that's like a pattern that I have. I'm not explaining it right. But anyway, I'm going to give the example. The other day I was, and this is like the little light bulb moment of how I know that things are moving like differently, right? And I've had so many of these light bulb moments with you to do with boundaries and so many just relational things where I would have reacted in a certain way or blown up before. And it's like, oh, actually, I can just actually be calm. And instead of reacting, I can go and just do a little bit of a timeout and just chill and see what comes up. And then instead of blowing up, I might cry a little bit, you know? So just little big things like that. But one of the most recent things that's kind of blown my mind, I haven't actually told you about it, is in my mind, I've said, oh, you know, it'd be really nice to have more ease, you know, in life in general. So it's like easy for not easy, but the mind, that's from a mental space, like, oh, I want more ease. And then like you can dream and vision what that ease would look like, okay? And it's like, oh, that feels nice. So then like, oh, I have that feeling of ease in my body. And then so that was just like one day I thought that. And then a few days later, I had a bit of a conflict with one of my friends. And this is a new friend. And he's very much into this work. He said yesterday, he said, we're intimacy geeks. Like we love this stuff, right? We love all this relating stuff. And yeah, so he's into it. And we had this conflict, and usually when I have conflict in previous relationships, or usually my pattern is that I have to go into this process, and we're going to have this big conversation, and it's just going to be tiring, and I just don't have time for it, and all of that, like that type of energy. And so we had this conflict. There's a little bit of a back and forth chat about it, like via voice note. And then like it had been a couple days later, and he didn't respond to my voice note. Okay. And so he changed the topic and started talking about something else. Okay. So old pattern would have been to get really angry at that and then ignore it and then just be all passive aggressive. Instead of doing that, I just was like, hey, yeah, happy to respond to that, but you didn't respond to my last notes. ... Smiley face, like, come on. And he's like, oh, I didn't think I needed to. I'm good with all that. I didn't think it was this heavy. I think he's okay with me sharing this. Yeah, it's fine. He knows how lit up I am about it. Yeah. So he's like, I didn't think it was that heavy, and I'm all good. Like, I'm all good processing my own thing, but I'm here to hold space for you if you want. Like, I just here to hold space for ease. If you need anything from me, let me know. And I was like, oh, it can be that easy. I was like, oh no, I just needed it to be acknowledged. That's it. I'm fine. Like, I don't need anything more. Thanks. And it just made me realize, like, I thought that I had to go into this pattern of like, oh, we're going to have to go into big, deep and meaningful. We're going to have to sort this out. It's going to be difficult. It's going to be hard. And all it was, oh yeah, I'm good. Like, I'm good. If you're not good, I'm here for you. I didn't think it's that heavy. It can be easy. I was like, oh, I didn't think it was that heavy. It could be easy. I'm like, it can be easy. What? And so I had to like really check myself and be like, oh, I'm just used to this like efforting with relationships. And actually, because I'm changing and I'm attracting humans that get where I'm going and like resonate with me, and my standards of relating are changing, it's like, oh, it actually can be easy with the right people. Maybe that's the, yeah, not maybe, but yeah, it can be. All right, that's my story.
I guess what is probably highlighting for me, or what's like really what I'm hearing, is that you noticed another possibility that
Mm,
was, oh, I can choose this. I have agency. And
mm,
that for me is the repatterning.
mm,
Doesn't necessarily mean everything has to be easy or that's
mm.
wrong. If it's not easy, it's not
Yeah,
good.
yeah.
But simply that I have the agency and choice that we can have a conversation and it's clear. You know, maybe with another person who had a different trauma response or trigger, it might have been not so simple for communication, and that doesn't necessarily mean it would have been bad.
Mm.
But in that choice, you yourself realized, oh, there's another option here.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
not tied to this one pattern. This also can happen.
yeah.
And that's for me really the key. It's that we're not locked into ways of being, that we can access the whole spectrum of beingness. It's kind of like, oh, I used to be an artist and I only painted in black and white. And that's great. Like maybe that's your thing and that's great. That's your unique signature flavor. But the fact that you might want to choose blue when you're feeling whatever, melancholy, or you want to choose red when you're feeling passionate, you want to, you want to have the whole spectrum to create a sunset, this
Mm.
is what we're reclaiming, these different ways of being. And it doesn't mean that, yeah, I guess it's, again, then you can choose like, oh no, I do want to go with black today because I need to set, let's say black stands for boundaries. I need to set the boundary, and that might be uncomfortable for this person and it might be hard for them to receive that.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. You made that from a conscious choice and awareness that is not just because you thought that's how it has to be, or that's how you grew up and that's how your parents were, or whatever story narrative you grew up with, but that you chose because that was what was needed in the moment. And yeah, sometimes we might go back to those patterns.
Mm.
I mean, soft and compassionate to us, and we're like, oh shit, I did that thing again. Cool,
Yeah.
that triggered my child self to react in that way, just like when I was whatever, the story. But yeah, the fullness of choice and agency.
Mm. And what I'll notice as well is even when I do go back into old patterns, which people do because we're humans, that guilt and the shame and the self-punishment that used to be there, it might pop up and I'm like, no, I'm not gonna do that. That's not helpful. So there's like even a different pattern in that, which is cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's awesome. That's kind of the next layer of it. Hey, it's like, okay, now I can actually hold these parts and not only have a relationship with them, but also understand why maybe in the past these parts might have helped me survive a really traumatic experience, or they helped me, deal with abuse and still show up to school or whatever the story, I'm just coming up with scenarios, but, we can start to see them instead of as parts that we need to disown and get rid of, bring them back into what we called our primary awareness, or we integrate them into the self. So no longer separate from them, and therefore they have more control over us, but they're actually kind of like, not allies, because it's not like we're just letting them be like, yeah, you're awesome, toxic behavior, we can have a new relationship with them that we no longer need to hold that, as you're saying, like the shame or this punishment, that we can have spaciousness or softness or compassion, whatever is needed.
Yeah.
So that we can come back to, I guess all of what this work is about is supporting us to come back to our humanness in the best way as possible.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. I wanted to mention something because it's going to tie into the next thing I'm going to say, but one thing that you've really helped me with, that in the mind, you think that I used to think that I already knew what my needs were. And like, I was like, the mind thought, yeah, I got this down pat, right? But then in my patterning and what I would do is I would automatically bypass my needs and think about what the other person needs and then try and cater to that. So that's kind of like what I had. And then you helped me figure out where I was doing that, and that, hey, like how I was feeling and what I need is actually important. Like I need to that is something that I need to tune into and honor. And so in saying that, this is something I would never ask before, and I would just go all the way with holding on to this particular need. I really need to use the bathroom. And so I'm going to honor that now and just take a little pause. Because yeah, like before I would have just like held on and be like, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay, like do like a little dance by myself over here. Where it's like, no, I can just ask for that and we can just take a pause and that's actually okay. And I'm sure you're not going to mind.
Water for myself because I'm starting to feel thirsty.
Okay, and then we can both take care of our needs. All right, I'm going to pause this for a moment and then we'll come back in a little moment, guys. Okay, we're back.
I'm glad you did that. I'm sorry before you move on, because a lot of the somatic work is actually even reclaiming, our needs, and even on a very physiological level. Like I teach a lot of things like sighing and making sounds and, allowing yourself to move if you need to, and like, being weird in your movements or rocking, it's not linear, it's not static, it's, we're alive creatures. And I had this quick reflection of, I'm back, currently I'm living in Mexico, and I'm slowly coming back to some cultural conditioning that I wasn't even aware of, that was kind of in my field. And I only realized because there's a few things that my partner has done, and I'm like, oh, you can't do that. We're eating or whatever. And maybe I wouldn't have even said those things back in Australia, but because I'm back in this environment where I know the way certain things are in a culture, and it's not to disrespect, also to be like, fuck that, like we should not care about culture or other people's needs and just be obnoxious and do whatever we want. But there is a self-reflection where I'm like, oh wait, why am I even doing that? And like realizing like, oh yeah, my mom used to tell me not to do that on the table, and now we're back in a Spanish-speaking culture, and that's just come back to me, and I'm projecting it onto my partner.
Wow.
Just, oh, okay, cool.
I love that reflection. It's like, yeah, we're just all humans, Oh, okay. So I really wanted to, so now we've spoken a bit about embodiment, somatics. I think the listeners will have a bit more of a feel about what that is, and maybe, they've had a few insights in terms of like things that have come up for them, like how it relates to them. I wanted to talk about this conversation you mentioned in our talk about topics for the podcast around people dancing on Instagram and calling it embodiment. And I mean, like I reflected on that as well. And there's like, a couple of things came up for me. But yeah, I want to know, the conversation was around how deep is it? Is it attention seeking? I'd love to know just, your reflections, your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So just to give some context behind it, there's been a few conversations in my field, because I work with embodiment and somatics. There's a lot of people in my, my Instagram and my community that also does that. And I had one friend particularly share a very kind of, I guess she expressed her anger around it. And she was like, I'm sick of this energy, these videos of people just dancing in their lingerie and saying it's embodiment and join my course, $200. And she was definitely calling out this kind of what I would call maybe like an immature, ego-based kind of attitude, energy, behavior, embodiment. And there was a lot of, and to give more context, in her post, there was this infographic around, which was quite judgmental infographic around spiritual hookers or like kind of prostituting yourself in the name of spirituality. And it brought about a lot of conversation, and it's very nuanced and very complex. And I don't think I could give it justice to, kind of speak on behalf of everyone and everything, every little point. And I really am aware of that, especially not only as a human and as a female, but just, there's like lots of things to consider in this conversation. And I guess it became quite polarized straight away. And that's what was the main thing that I was attuning to, because in other conversations, what I was noticing was a split between kind of freedom and sexual energy and women reclaiming themselves in this way, some kind of spiritual hierarchy as well, some kind of reclamation. For some people, it's like an artistic expression. For other people, it is maybe coming from a wounded place of, as you said, maybe attention seeking, or maybe, if we look at it from the lens of therapy, like hypersexuality over repression. And I always think, whenever you see these things, you can tell when someone's authentic or in their embodied expression. But when you're new to this field or you're looking for someone to work with, I do think that it takes a responsibility or awareness if you are selling courses, or you're calling yourself a coach, or there's some kind of expert status that you're claiming, but then you're not fully maybe owning certain actions from where they're coming from, or fully, I guess what was also really present in this dialogue is that generally the women that you see doing this are either very thin, or they're in the lingerie, and they're, there's a certain standard of beauty that's being kind of shown in a specific kind of movement and dance, which generally lacks some kind of diversity or depth, or maybe even awareness for what that can do for someone in the world of embodiment. So, I think there's this level of integrity that, we can hold and question, because it's important to have a certain level of, I don't want to say standard, because, I am all up for someone expressing themselves as they need to, if that's part of their reclamation, especially, journeying with, as a woman who's reclaimed my own sensual expression. That was huge for me, to be able to be in my erotic dance and not feel like I was going to be shamed or judged, or that I was like a slut or whatever it is. But also to be aware of like that doesn't make me better than someone else, it's kind of like, I've reclaimed myself, so therefore, I'm better now, or, which is a spiritual hierarchy, or that there's this like unrecognized attention seeking, or and I'm sorry, this is kind of a big topic, so I'm kind of just going into all the things, that I might be doing the same thing if I'm doing those behaviors as a sex worker would, yet I am calling it something different and saying it's the inner work.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think that's something we need to be really mindful of and really aware of. It's not just the awareness of like, okay, if I'm holding space as a facilitator and, you know, taking people into their bodies, you know, there's trauma, there's, you know, all of these things can happen, as we're saying, can be really unsafe if I'm holding spaces without any awareness, or I'm pushing people beyond and I'm getting them into loops. But also if I am coming from this place that not only is lacking, I guess, self-awareness of where I am in my journey, but also then thinking that my work is better because it's not sex work. I think that's incredibly, dangerous kind of, something that we need to be aware of in like the Instagram culture, because I don't think we should be shaming sex work. I think can be in an empowered place. It can come from woundedness and trauma, but it can come from, you know, as we were saying, from choice, from agency. It can come from a really empowered place. But yeah, I guess there was this big, what I come back to at the end of the day, it's not so much what you're doing, but why and how. It's like the somatic kind of flip. But also that we don't have to be so polarized in our lives. Like, I guess that's something really that the Tantrika has taught me, and like my Kashmir Shaivism lineage and studying so many years in Tantra really allowed me to hold with a little bit more awareness, is that, you know, we can slip into black and white, like this is good, this is bad, or, you know, life is this way or this way. You know, life is messy, life is not linear, we go through stages, and yet our behaviors have a ripple effect into the world. And, you know, there's a level of self-accountability that is required when you're playing with sexual energy or magic or alchemy, you know, those kind of more sexy things that are now really out there, you know, and the complexity of it all, that we can integrate those parts and hold compassion for the woman that's in that space, and or the man, whatever it is, the situation. But actually, if we can really attune or have kind of the sacred awareness or respect or acknowledgement of these lineages, instead of cherry picking the parts that we think are sexy or, you know, that we want, because as you're saying, like, I have this idea and this is what it's going to be, and it's like, actually, to get there you need to go through it, or you need to feel this, or you know, it's just an opportunity for us to kind of find more depths in the teaching. It's kind of like the West has cherry picked these incredibly rich rituals or expressions or you know, practices, and it's like, oh, we can extrapolate that and take it separate and just do that, and we'll manifest money. And it's like, well, have you worked on clearing your values? Have you worked with what is important with you? Have you worked on being clear in with yourself? Like that, which is like the prerequisite, the foundational work of being with self, is not only necessary for you to actually get here in a kind of integral way, but actually is going to allow you to get to the places where you want to go. Because if we're just kind of choosing what we think we want, we're kind of going around it and not actually having the full kind of wisdom of the depth of the experience, because we just want that pretty shiny bit. And actually the depth of that other bit that maybe is like sitting with ourselves or being able to contain our energy and consciously choose when we want to like do that for whatever reasons, is what gives us the inner resources, the resiliency piece, the capacity. As you're saying, it gives us choice. So I'm not just stuck in like, oh, if I do this expression, I'm going to be loved, or people are going to appreciate me because that is beauty and then I feel better about myself. I don't know, whatever. It's like, then we can actually really find freedom, because sometimes when we find these cherry-picking moments from Eastern traditions or somatic practices were generally all rooted in Eastern traditions. They come with lineage, they come with ritual, they come with like hours with practicing the thing so that you can get to the other thing. Kind of like, I want to get to the mountains, so I'm going to get a helicopter and just go on there. And you're like, oh, yeah, the mountain helicopter view is great. And I'm sure it's great, you know, it's not to devalue that. But, you know, there's something in getting into the journey and like the fulfillment of being on the top of the mountain. And that's just an analogy I'm using, that we're trying to get anywhere where there's like a top. But yeah, this idea that just to become aware of where we might be, you know, one of the great teachers from the Eastern traditions, who brought Buddhism to the West, Trungpa Rinpoche, he calls it spiritual materialism. And really, that's something that really I hadn't even thought of until now. Like, that can really permeate into our culture and our Instagram without us even being aware. And, you know, I'm sure we all, you know, everyone does it in their own ways. And that's a process of like checking in and being accountable and having people in the community like, hey, like, are you just oversharing this part of yourself because you want attention? Or what is the true, the truth behind it, rather than taking the step back and being like, okay, like, this is just a creative expression. Or, you know what, this is what it is. I just want want to appreciate my body or my dance. And sometimes it is just a celebration of joy or sexiness, or, you know, reclaiming these parts. But really, to be honest with ourselves does take that certain accountability. And it doesn't mean we're better or not, you know, this idea. Some of it might be privileged that we can even do those reflections or see a therapist or, you know, have this community of conscious whatever. But for those who are, it's a beautiful invitation.
Yeah, I love that. And yeah, like you said, there's just so many layers to it, right? It's just, you know, it's not black and white. It's like the whole, you know, Madonna whore complex. Is that what you call it? It's like the very polarized view. And I mean, I just want to share like the tiniest bit of my experience with this, because I've done it all. I've done it for expression, I've done it for attention, I've done it for all the things. And then I remember like the first time I ever took mushrooms, right? It was like I microdosed. I took like the tiniest bit in like a little ceremony by myself. And what came up for me was dancing on Instagram. Honestly, I did that the first time and it was just full expression. It was the message of expression is everything, because obviously there was a part of me that needed to express, and that's where it came from. And then from there was times where it was just like, I'm doing this because I think I have to do this because of some reason. And then there was other times where it's like, oh, this is actually just because I want attention. And then there's other times because it was like, oh, this feels like art to me and this feels beautiful to me and I want to share this. And so I, even with not just dancing on Instagram, but also just posting photos, right? It's like, am I posting, like, is it coming from this shadow of like, I need something, I need grab it from you type thing? Or is it coming from this like, oh, I'm actually okay with this? And another thing that came up for me was around, like if you think of like the feminine, like being seen and that. And so it's like, I love what you said, because there's so many layers, so much complexity, nuance to it. And it's like, it's all about that awareness of where it's coming from, right? That self-responsibility, especially if you're offering something like to people. Yeah.
I'm thinking about two other things. You know, there's this individual layer as well. And there's also the systematic kind of layer where just hearing you talk about the feminine, you know, we are in a period of women reclaiming, not only women, but society reclaiming the feminine, and even like the witches and, you know, all that. And there is a lack of initiation for maidens to go into that expression. You know, there's not a lot of safe containers where you can go and explore your sexuality. And, you know, I've definitely even experienced that myself, you know, going into shamanic sexual trainings with no kind of offering of containers around boundaries or inner safety or anything around that. It was like, here are the things, go explore them. And then, you know, I learned a lot through that. Of course, you know, how could you not? But I was lucky. I had already developed, you know, a lot of inner research. I've done a lot of work. I had already studied a lot of somatic therapy, and I was much more self-aware. But there is this thing that also we're lacking in our society. And I do notice that the amount of women doing these videos or photos, and let's even also say like Instagram's set up for photos and videos of people, beautiful people. You know, you could write a really long caption, but if it's a shitty photo, you might not get that many likes. You know, it's set up in a way that, you know, perpetuates that way. That's status quo. And it's the same thing I see as women reclaiming their relationship with their bodies. And in some ways it's healthy, you know, like it's like women were really suppressed and oppressed, and like now they're all like, we're back. And sometimes it goes to this extreme. And when you play with fire, you can get burnt. Like that's what happens. Sexual energy is sexy. Magic is magical. It's numinous. It's, you know, it's alive. It's when we're learning to, you know, play with these energies, like we might get burnt at the beginning, or we might learn through our mistakes. And that is like a really important, valid place in our growth and evolution, in humanity, individually, collectively, all of it. And doesn't mean we just, as you said, just do whatever the fuck we want and take no accountability and, you know, trailblaze. And, you know, there's been enough of that done in the world for us not to learn from that experience. So it's like, how can we hold the spaciousness and the compassion for that process whilst also giving kind of not the eldership, but the kind of like, oh, you know, I know where that behavior can develop to, or, you know, you can explore this, or here's a safe container for that, or, you know, like that's another aspect that we lack in a lot of our Western culture is eldership circles where people have you, held you, and hold you not only accountable, but also create safe containers, which is why all these courses are now popping everywhere. And, you know, for the longest time, I had so much resistance to them because I was like, oh, here's another course, or here's another expert in blah, blah, blah. And really, it's needed. It's necessary. We're collectively having this massive awakening, and we're reclaiming these parts and creating new relationships. And we're fucking it up as we do it. And we're learning as we go. And we're, you know, some people are doing great things as well. And, you know, it's all part of the process. But yeah, I know when I step into that bigger picture, I'm like, okay, cool. Like, how do we dance between both? Like, the individual, the collective, what is my responsibility? What can I do for my community? What can I hold in for others with my truth without judging and shaming? Because shaming people in those expressions not helping anyone either. If anything, it's it's keeping that kind of
loop.
Exactly. So yeah, super complex.
Yeah. Yeah, it's you can take it with anything though. So it's like the dancing on Instagram is like one thing, but like you said, there's other things like the hypersexuality, the repression, anything that's polarized. It's like the question is like how to find that middle point. And I think you said some important things, like fucking up is sometimes needed, like not even sometimes, like I would say it's part of the experience, right? Of finding your own way through that. And I mean, like there's so much, like I even like in experiencing yourself in, I'm just using this as an example, like a hypersexual state, or experiencing yourself in a repressed state, and then like having the awareness, or even like being able to reflect and look back, and then through that even acknowledgement of that awareness of what you were like then and why, and just like it's like mining for gold and like finding a more fuller picture, which is kind of like the work that you said, like that, even like the trauma work, it's like finding that fuller picture. Yeah.
100%. And this goes back to like the reason why there's so many courses out there, you know, and at first I was like, oh, resistance, you know, like it is our kind of modern way of finding mentors or like teachers, you know. I've studied a lot of through the lineage of Kashmir Shaivism as one of my main lineages. And there's protocols, there's ways of, you know, before you get to the like sexy ritual, you do these mantras for like 10 months, and then you understand this bit, and then you open up to the yantra. You know, there's all these parts. And I have so much gratitude that I was even had access to that. You know, it was a massive privilege that I could learn from this ancient lineage with teachers in a modern way that applied to me not only on the mat in yoga and somatic movement therapy, but in my life, because they're not separate. But you know, we really need these containers, these maps, these systems, these ways that our ancestors, you know, have been practicing for years and reclaiming, so that we don't have to keep, you know, reinventing the wheel. It's like, oh, well, there's a path here, and you can adapt it, you can evolve it. And of course, like being aware of cultural appropriation and all those things, like they're really important. Otherwise, we're doing the cherry picking thing again, or, you know, just colonizing it. But yeah, I see this, as you're saying, like it's applied in so many parts of Instagram or business coaches or, you know, whatever it is. It's like, wow, we're all just looking for these ways of guiding each other and supporting each other, and like acknowledging like, oh, you have that piece, cool, give me that piece and I'll give you this, or I'll give you my pure devotion, whatever it is, which is the like back and forward aliveness of giving and receiving. And it's not this like separate, like, which is the same thing if we just take whether it's a practice or I don't know, a symbol, whatever it is. It happens a lot. Like everyone's just like, here's an and it brings you peace. I'm like, well, do you know what an is? Have you sat with an have you practiced it? Like, you know, the 4 parts of the the turiya, you know, like there's so much to these portals, that if we actually can really go into the depths in the relationship with it, and we can each provide the little keys that we have from those, staying with those, whether it's a symbol, whether it's a practice, a method, whatever it is, we can really find much more richness and depth and integrity and, yeah, all those good things we've talked about, aliveness, pleasure. Yeah.
It's like not just having it the mental sphere, but all, like this process of integration. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. One other thing you mentioned when we were talking about this is around the trauma-informed cults. Is trauma-informed the new cult? It sounds like a magazine headline. I want to know, like, firstly, we probably have to even like give like just like a brief overview, like what is trauma-informed and why do people think it's the new cult?
Oh, there's so much to that. Well, let's just talk about this idea of, you know, our society is becoming aware of trauma. There's been this massive awakening around, you know, it happens a lot with the war veterans coming back from Vietnam and whatnot, and clinicians realizing like, oh, this is what PTSD does, or how it behaves, and oh, how we used to like treat it. And I think we are you know, our younger generations that are coming forward are very kind of hyper aware, or even like intelligently aware of all these kind of politically correct terminologies and behaviors. And you know, I'm still like grasping some things and like, oh, like there's this new pronoun or gender, you know, these things. I'm like, cool, like I'm learning. But even one of the responses of these, you know, I see like we went through a period in our society that was very repressed, or you know, there was a lot of trauma. And even in the study, in the field of trauma, more from like kind of nerdy space, the people who were researching epigenetics. So there was this research of, I've forgotten her name, it's terrible, but she researched epigenetics, and she was like, okay, I'm going to call out on all of the Holocaust survivors in New York. And I'm going to, you know, she was studying trauma, and she was like aware of like the effects of trauma, and that, you know, you have freeze, you have flight, fight, respond, and how it affects the relationship, and blah, blah, blah. And basically she made this massive call out, and instead of getting the survivors of the Holocaust, she got all of their children. So she got this second generation. So she then became aware, like, oh wow, trauma is actually inherited. It's passed genetically. And you know, so is resiliency, so is strength. You know, it's not just one or the other. And I guess from there, the whole field of trauma has really grown, as well as we were speaking about, this trauma-informed space. And even, you know, we see this happening, especially in the yoga scene, where there's perhaps been some cultural behaviors that maybe don't align in the West, maybe are also out of integrity, the way gurus might behave with women, or, you know, even the way maybe a traditional yoga teacher, and now it's, you know, might happen anywhere, but you know, it's common back that they might stand on you in a back bend or in a forward fold. It's happened to me before, and just to get me to that kind of push where I can go beyond my toes, because I was very flexible. And you know, it's a different way of, maybe it's a cultural thing that they've been working through, we're working through, but has become aware in the yoga scene, like, oh, this is not very trauma informed, right? There's a lack of choice, there's a lack of trust, there's a lack of safety. So yeah, I guess trauma informed is mostly being able to be aware that people have trauma, there's sensitivities. Offering choice is important. When someone tells you what you should be doing is a red flag, or how you should be doing, and there's no other ways, you have to do this, and it's my way, it's not very safe. It can traumatize people. But also what we've seen is that it's grown into this, I kind of see it as well as like almost eggshelling culture. And I think it's really important to be trauma aware, but not necessarily trauma scared or trauma, because, you know, there's some schools of thought where you're like, shouldn't even refer to certain parts of the body because that can re-traumatize someone, you know. And if we start going to so much, not depth, but because that's not the word, like intricacy of those things, you know, then we just skip out on the body. And then we're just walking around the body like, oh, that might not be safe. Oh, if I do this, it might not be safe. And it's kind of like, as we said, it's not what it is, it's how you do it, right? It's like, okay, if you're going to put a scent on your yoga class, well, are you going to burn incense? Have you checked in? Is it a good idea? Do you know your students? You know, and some people would say that's not a good idea because you might trigger someone, and someone might say like, well, actually, I know my students for 20 years, they all use this incense, it's fine. I checked in with them, they're happy with it, they actually asked for it, you know. It's really important, I guess, being someone that's worked in the body for so long, somatically, like as a body worker, as a yoga teacher, as more of a psychotherapist, you know, the only way to heal the body is also to be in relationship with it. So we can't just avoid it and, you know, put like an X somewhere, like maybe not safe, don't go around it. It's like, no, that's not really a healing, healthy space. And if I am offering some kind of work, and I don't have the skills or the capacity to hold someone in their trauma, like, okay, I'm going to do this embodied dance course where, you know, or re-breath work, whatever, rebirthing breath work that might bring people's trauma up. And if I don't have the capacity to really hold people in that space, then I might, well, I'm not going to say might, I would suggest you take some some courses around how to do that in a safe way that's not re-traumatizing someone, or to get someone on your team that can check in with people and actually help them one-on-one, or that you have a general awareness around things like titration, that I'm not going to push someone to experience. I'm going to build capacity and slowly, you know, kind of go in and out of it and see how they respond and how we go in and check in. But yeah, it's trauma informed than you called. It's definitely another reflection of the polarized, you know, like hypersexuality, like shamanic sexual chorus, you know, revolution, with like the other opposite being like, whoa, that's extreme, that's not safe, let's do the opposite and like be really, really careful. And yeah, I would kind of probably be a little bit controversial and say that I stand in the middle. Like, I'm trauma informed, but I am also trauma care. I provide trauma care, which means like, I guess I have the studies and the backgrounds, and I know that I know my scope and I know where I can support someone within their process of, you know, in their trauma, and I actively work with them in their trauma. But if I didn't, of course, I wouldn't go there unless I knew I had someone on board that could, or, you know? So yeah, that's my 2 cents in the trauma informed. I don't know if you have anything else you want to add to that or spark to that combo.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? And it's like something that people have to kind of explore themselves as well. It's like, because, you know, I had one of my mentors on here, Jamie, and she's like, sometimes you have to experience the quote unquote, and like, this is just really, I want to emphasize the, what do you call these things, like the marks, I can't remember what they're called, you know, when you have to, whatever, the quote marks, like sometimes you have to have the quote unquote wrong experience to know like what feels right. It's like going to that, oh, okay, this, something about this doesn't feel good, what is that? And like sometimes, like I said, with like the talk, like that specific interaction, like that moment with the talk therapist that I had, it's like at the time I had no idea, you know, I didn't know what felt safe to me. I just knew that this was something, and I was here and I was doing it, and I was having this experience, and I was, you know, I don't know, even know if I was aware of like the sensations, but I knew that something was happening, right? And so I had to have that experience to know like what feels right, to like to go and explore this other space where it's like everything is about the body, everything's about trauma, everything's safety, 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 safety. And it's like, okay, now I have this experience. And then it's like weaving in between all of that and experiencing, experiencing and integrating, and then coming to this other place. And it's a never ending process, right? So, I mean, it's just interesting. Yeah. The one side of no trauma knowledge, and then the other side of absolutely walking on eggshells. And yeah, it's
actually, I just remembered, for some reason before I had it on my notes of like what the key principles are for trauma informed practices, and really they're pretty essential for any inner work, and they're safety, trust, choice and agency, collaboration, empowerment, and respect for diversity. And generally, a trauma-informed space will make sure there's not a hierarchical model, so that everyone's kind of on the same plane. And I guess this idea of like offering choices, or, you know, not telling people what to do, or forcing an experience over someone. And
Yeah.
if you go back to that original kind of, you know, key principles choice, key principles, it would be ideal if every container had that. Like, oh my God, I'm kind of like, oh, does this mean the next generation will have these like containers that are way more integrated, and there's definitely more safety and trust and choice and agency, so they don't have to go through all of that, you know,
Yeah.
experience to get to the knowing or the wisdom. You know, it doesn't mean you have to suffer to get to the expanded awareness or the wisdom. You know, sometimes it comes with that, it's the byproduct of that, but it doesn't necessarily mean if you suffer and you come out of it, you know, you're more awakened human or something like that. But,
Suffering is necessary, though.
well, you know, and then some Eastern traditions would say that, you know, every life is suffering. You know, there's some kind of very, not bleak, but straightforward, like everything's suffering, and life is about just becoming okay with that. And I guess it depends what your school of thought is, what is your belief system. And in the process, you might change, and you might kind of be like, okay, I'm really like this, or I'm really like left now. Now I'm like in the middle, or whatever it is. But yeah, to be able to have the choice and explore and know from your own embodied self, I think that's really valuable.
Yeah. Yeah. And you mentioned something. I think we will finish up really soon. I think the last little bit. You mentioned something about, you know, that lady that was studying epigenetics and finding out that, you know, obviously the trauma was passed down. But then also that resiliency. And if there's such a massive movement now around trauma informed, and all of it like coming to the surface for people to start to really explore, it's like, well, yeah, there is hope for the next generations then, you know? So
It's their hope, but I see it like there is a richness in, I guess I was lucky. I grew up in so many countries where there was a lot of struggle and resiliency, and not only that, but a lot of culture and art and beauty. Like, oh my God, that was something I really missed as soon as I got to Mexico. I was like, oh, so much, I guess, like transmutation of whatever is alive for them into art and expression. And it's in everything. It's in the way they cook, and, you know, and the art, and like even my teacup.
yeah.
It's permeating in the culture because that's part of their history, of their ancestry, of the heritage. And I think that's an important piece also when we're talking about these trauma-informed spaces, or like even reclamation of self, is that our expression, or coming back to our, you know, it's like, I call it like the technology or the alchemy for transmutation is really important as well. It's like, you know, I think sometimes we can get caught up with like the clinical bits, or the kind of like, oh, this is what you got to do, or no, it's the other way, as we were talking about the polarities. But the creative expression, the drumming, the art, the trance, the rituals, you know, as we were saying, so much of the West doesn't have that, and that's why we like go into these other cultures that, oh, like I love this, or, you know, this ritual from whatever. It's like, wow, we really need to reconnect to those. I think those are actually so key to our well-being. And not only to our well-being, because you know, that can become really also this kind of going back to this idea of like the decolonizing piece. Is not just it's about our well-being, it's how we should be able to be as humans. You know, we should be able to express and have rituals and have initiations and journeys where we're you know, we grow, we learn, we have elders supporting us, and we have the community supporting us, having children, and we're not like based, doing this solo thing
Mm.
within the ocean of beingness. It's a really kind of detached way of living in the world. And I guess kind of to begin to wrap it up, that's like, I guess my biggest wish for us to come back to those true essence qualities that are already within us. It's like you're already home when you come back to yourself and your beingness. And as you said, like your needs and your, it's like we think we have to do this whole thing and we have to go and like, but sometimes it's actually much more simple, and coming back to those like really basic human, cultural, biological, soul, true nature kind of qualities. Or I don't have the words for it, but I think I'm articulating kind of bigger kind of reclamation of self.
I love it. Oh, this has been so nice. Thank you so much. It's been, what's the word? It's been very rich, I think. Very rich. And yeah, so nice. Before we go into where people can find you, I mean, that was a beautiful ending there. I don't think we need to say any more, but I think we covered so many layers and so much depth. And yeah, it's really beautiful. It just makes you, I wouldn't say it makes you, it's not just that it makes you think, but it's like it makes you feel into the experience of things more than just thinking about right and wrong. Because if you're in the mind all the time, it's like that's the polarization, right? It's like this is right, this is wrong. It's like when you go into the body and you experience, it's like that. What am I trying to say? I know I can't find the words. It's like that's where the integration is. That's where the lessons are. That's where we grow in out of those silos into more deeper connection. So yeah,
It makes me think of something my teacher says. It's like, when you're really in that split, it's like trying to look into the mirror to see if you're not feeling well. And it's like, well, why would you look into the mirror? Like an external reflection of, and sometimes it might be a good way to check in, like, oh, I have eye bags, I should probably sleep. But it's kind of like, hopefully with this work, we have that inner connection that, as you said, it's not like I'm thinking about what I'm feeling or what I should be doing, but I'm actually having kind of a marriage between what I know, what I sense, what I feel, and what I am in this present moment.
Yeah, I love it. Beautiful. Thank you so much. Oh, so good. All right. So, how can people find you? I'll pop it all in the show notes if you want to access. I'll pop your Instagram and your website on there. Is there any other way people can connect with you, or what have you got going on as well? Like, what are you offering?
So at the moment, I've been taking a step back to really rest and have a holiday. I've had a big 2 years of offering a lot of one-on-one work during the pandemic and floods in Australia and Queensland and New South Wales. I've been kind of taking a step to refresh and re-inspire. I'm also working on a lot of cool projects. So I'm creating some new courses. I'm working on an evergreen course. I'm working on a way to actually provide more group movement therapy, somatic therapy, as well as more of mentorship containers. But at the moment, I have gone back to some of my one-on-ones, so that is an option. It probably will change towards the end of the year. I'll be offering less of that so that I can reach more people. I'm also offering somatic yoga online through Alive Yogi, which is a platform that I'm a part of. But the main thing I would say is people just to get in touch. Either
Say that again. That last sentence just cut out. The main thing you suggest is
just to get in touch with me, whether it's through an email or an Instagram DM or whatever. Like I'm a very kind of down to earth person. Come have a chat with me, email me, and we can have a free call if you're unsure or you're not sure what you like, what's the inspiration. You're like, oh, I just know I want to work with you. Cool, just call me. We'll see if we're a good fit. And I can kind of see what might be better for me to offer you, whether it's movement, embodied kind of mentorship, or is it more like, okay, we should do some one-on-one weekly sessions until you're a bit more in a regulated, safe, inner resource space to then do some more alchemical kind of life-altering transformation work. So yeah, email hello@laudamedia.com.au, website www.laudamedia.com.au, and Instagram laudamedia.
I'll pop it all in the show notes. That's so good. Are you able to tell us, like, are you able to tell us what the courses will be, like what the evergreen will be, or what they are?
They're still deep in the hibernation time. I'm still deep in like the cauldron and hibernating and also creating them. So basically, to give you just kind of a juicy health sense for it, I'm really wanting to create some offerings that really merge the Kashmir tribalism lineage that I've been kind of a deeply journeying for so long, the alchemy with the psychotherapy, the trauma-informed, well, not even just trauma-informed, trauma care. So I really want to create a space where all of that actually comes home. I guess I've been seeing the split, people offering like the sensual embodiment courses and the yoni de-armoring, which is really important work. And it kind of gets separated from kind of the deeper kind of roots of like, oh, well, if there's shame, maybe we need to look at that. Or, the psychotherapy kind of more releasing trauma, whatever it is, and kind of bringing all those parts. So it is a juicy, embodied experience where it also takes you deep. And there might be some parts that you're like, wow, that was uncomfortable. I'm noticing that I have this fawning pattern, and this is how I adapt to survive, and these are some ways I'm supported in my community and in this space to actually begin to find new reference points, not only of safety and in my relationships and in my experience, but also I have tools that I can come back to, and then from there I can find more pleasure, more beauty, more all of the nectar, the juiciness.
I love. Oh, thank you so much, Laura, for being on the podcast. I've loved every second of it, and I'm just so excited to get this out to everybody.
Thank you so much for having me. I feel like I rambled on in so many topics and wasn't quite catching my words, but I feel really grateful to have the opportunity and space to just kind of express my 2 cents. And it's so beautiful to do this with you. We've been working one-on-one for so long, and I feel we flipped roles a little bit, like I'm in your space now. So
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.
Bye.